Is it me, Arpin, or instead of being the beginning of a new season, we're still following the buzz of the tail of last season, and it's just a continuation of the good vibes surrounding the Montreal Canadiens early on? Because I certainly feel it's like that.
Yeah, maybe. I hadn't thought of it that way. But there's no denying the vibes are good.
Hmm.
That's for sure. Um, it's not perfect, but yeah, Canadians are 4-1-0 after 5 games. Um, but so yeah, good
Yeah.
vibes.
And maybe, uh, well, welcome everybody to the Basu and Godin Notebook. Let's start with that. Sometimes I like to mix it around instead of saying the same thing at the beginning. A cold open once in a while is good. We're Friday, October 17th. Yes, the Canadians are 4-1-0. They won their 2 games this week who were against weaker opponents. I find in similar fashion, and something that I thought was really intriguing is that in both cases, you had visiting teams who made a conscious effort to try to slow down the Canadians
Mhm.
and make sure that they would not start their offense. And for so many years, it was the Canadians who would try to do that, the opponent. And now it feels as though the tables have turned a little bit, and the other teams respect the Canadian speed and the potential of their attack. And so they find ways to neutralize them, to make things difficult, keep them on the outside, making sure that they don't necessarily always transfer all that possession time into like significant offense and a lot of
Mhm.
shot volume. And both teams, to a certain extent, succeeded in that way. But the Canadians also were very effective defensively. That has certainly helped them. But in due time, talent prevails, and you've got guys who are showing up at the right time. So that combination of a very responsible defense, but also having those guys, those game breakers again, who who are showing up at the right time. Cole Caulfield being the first among them, but other guys too. I mean, Lane Hudson had a great game against Nashville. But the
And
combination
Seattle.
of those two things, and Seattle too,
Mhm.
it seems like it's really making a positive difference, despite the fact that as a continuation to last year, we hear we hear players talk about the Canadians having their B game and winning despite having their B game, which was something we would hear quite a bit last season.
Yeah, it's raising the floor, right? You can take a whole bunch of things that we've heard from Martin St. Louis over the years as being a goal, and so far through 5 games, their floor has been raised. Their ceiling has not been hit yet, but yeah, the floor has been raised. And you know, we should, we talked about their schedule prior to the season. They played the Leafs and they lost, and but they played probably their best game in that game. And then they beat, Detroit pretty handily. And to be fair, Detroit has won all three of their games since then, including a game against Toronto. And then they kind of had to squeak out a win against Chicago in Chicago. They had to squeak out a win against Seattle, and they had to squeak out a win against Nashville. So there's a lot of
It's a
room for
lot of squeaking.
improvement. It's a lot of squeaking. They could use some oil. I think their game needs a little bit of a tune-up, a little oiling.
Hmm.
But the fact is that after 5 games, they're 4-1-0, and there's a big results versus process question here. And I don't think anyone on the Canadians is hiding from that. And I think starting with Martin St. Louis and right down to the players. And what you mentioned, turning that possession into offense, I think is a big part of where the Canadians can improve. And I find it really interesting that, Martin St. Louis spent the bulk of training camp working on defense, not necessarily defensive zone, but the way the Canadians will defend. And we're seeing that play out. They are forcing teams to dump pucks in because they are pressuring them in the neutral zone and they are making controlled entries difficult. And because their defense is so mobile, they can collect those dump ins and get it out of the zone with possession and therefore defend less. Like this is something that Martin really, really emphasized during training camp, and they've entered the season executing on that plan by and large. They did give up four against Seattle, but I still think that was a pretty strong defensive effort in that respect. I think there's a couple of those goals Sam Montembeault probably would have liked to have seen back, which partly explains why Jakub Dobeš was in the net against Nashville. But overall, I looked up their defensive metrics in terms of their league rankings after the game last night, and I put it in my story. But they're a top five team in many areas. That areas in which they were literally in last in the league after 5 games a year ago. So there's there's something to be said for that, and there's something to be recognized that despite, say, a lesser caliber of opponent, just based on who made the playoffs last year, like none of the four teams they've beaten were playoff teams last year.
That's it.
They should be beating these teams if they are the playoff team that they plan to be. But that doesn't mean that those teams are not looking to make the jump, especially Detroit. I mean, those teams are not looking to make a jump. Even a team like Chicago, who hammered the Blues the other night, like just destroyed them. Um, it's the beginning of the season for everyone, and you're kind of getting their best effort. And I think you're right to point out that their opponents are playing in a way that respects the Canadiens' speed a great deal, and they do not want to let them counterattack. They do not want to let them come in off the rush. They know that there's finishers. I find the attention that teams are paying to Demidov already to be very interesting.
Yeah.
There's guys on him immediately as soon as he has the puck, and so he's a guy who is clearly being mentioned in their game plan. Um, I find that despite all that, the brand of hockey that they're playing, it might not be sustainable to score a late goal to tie it and then win it in overtime every time. That's not really the way they have this week in both games. That's not sustainable. But what seems sustainable, at least for now, is all the stuff that they put such an emphasis on in training camp and really forcing teams to put pucks behind their D, which is what a lot of teams want to do anyway. But by forcing that issue and then by leaning on the mobility of your defense, I think it's a good strategy when you look at your personnel. You add a Dobson to a group that already included Mike Matheson, already included Lane Hudson, already included Caden Guhle, and even Alex Carrier is a pretty mobile guy back there in terms of retrieving dump-ins. But retrieving dump-ins is something that the Canadiens identified in Dobson as being one of the primary reasons they got him. And now the coach is taking that strength and building a game plan around it. So I just think it's smart. It's just a smart way for this specific group of players to be playing because they are fast, they are mobile, um, they play with certain principles, and their ability to stick to those principles is probably the biggest change from the first 5 games last year, where the infamous threw up all over ourselves thing happened, and that was because they didn't want to stick to principles. And so this team is, I thought it was telling after the game in Detroit, for example, that it was a blowout game, but what Martin St. Louis was happiest with was how the Canadiens played with that lead. And they didn't let Detroit get any spark of life in that game. They played a tight game. They managed the puck properly, and that's what had him most proud because I think that is the next step for this team. And that was a step they took last season. And so to get to your earlier point, more than the vibe, I think that is a continuation of the end of last season where the Canadiens really learned how to manage games at the NHL level and not constantly be on the hunt for offense.
It's pretty, I wouldn't say ironic necessarily, but it's a bit of a paradox that you've got the youngest team in the league that plays with a high level of maturity since the beginning of the season,
Yeah.
So, but I mean, the only caveat to what you said is that, and I mentioned that to you during the game against Seattle, I thought that they had done such a good job giving them nothing at all in the first two periods. Then they sort of started giving the slot, and the Kraken did not benefit from it. They did not take advantage of it at all. And I
Mhm.
suspect that a better team probably would have pounced on it more and make the Canadians pay for their, their lack of attention at that point in the game. But the big picture so far this season is that you look at the when you were referring to the metrics that are favorable defensively to the Canadians last year, they were like at the bottom of the league when it came to high danger chances against,
Mhm.
or even just the ratio high danger chances ratio for and against. Uh, Last year they finished 30th in the league for the high danger chances against per 60 minutes. They had
Yeah.
on average 12.21 of those per 60 minutes. And right now, short sample, only 5 games, they're fourth in the league
Yeah.
at only 8.75. So that's a drastic change. And it goes to being more organized in the defensive zone. It goes to being much better also in their back pressure that has come from a little bit of everybody.
Mhm.
At times we've seen Patrick Laine even doing it, but we see Ivan Demidov every now and then coming up with a huge back check
Every now and then, it's every game. He does it once a game.
once a game. Yeah, that's what I mean. On Blue Sky yesterday, because you pointed it out on Blue Sky, and I replied it was shades of Jacob de la Rose, and I think
Right.
that some people did not get the reference,
Oh,
but longtime
I
listeners
didn't even
of this
see that.
podcast,
Yes.
they know longtime listeners of our podcast know that we used to say that the one redeeming quality that Jacob de la Rose had, he was an elite back checker,
Right.
and in
The
that
problem
sense,
being was that he was back checking all the time.
that's right.
Yes.
It's something tells me it's not going to be Ivan Demidov's problem during
No.
his career, but he's already playing very responsibly. There are in all aspects of the off the puck game. Cole Caulfield is continuing his improvement, and it's really paying off in the good old turning good defense into good offense. Uh, but so this, I totally agree with you with the fact that this part of their game
Mm.
is is probably what's most that they can build the most on, despite the fact that it was probably not top opposition. But the fact that they're defensively sound, it buys them time to fix other areas, either individual performances that are maybe not up to par, up to what they would hope for, more collective aspects of the game, such as the power play, or maybe some chemistry among certain lines that are not exactly where they would need it to be. But if when you have timely goals and guys who can show up at the right time and set the Bell Center on fire, and
Mm.
at the other end, you're making sure that your goalies don't have to make 35 saves a game. You allow yourself that flexibility of racking up points early and buying time to fix what's not exactly the way you want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. You are, and that applies to the season as a whole. That applies to an individual game. Um, that allows you to stay in games and gives you the opportunity to let the game breaking talent break games later in games. And as long as they can stay in games, they have enough firepower up front, or just generally, not even just up front, um, to pull off what they did twice this week. And again, that's not a that's not a good model for winning. You know, you shouldn't need a goal in the last, well, I guess last 3 minutes Tuesday and the last minute on Thursday to tie the game, especially when it requires a shot block with an empty net behind you from Lane Hudson, and then
Brilliant
a pretty
pass.
brilliant pass afterwards. Um, that's not gonna keep working, obviously. But I think Thursday morning, Martin St. Louis was already talking about their sort of deficiencies in the offensive zone and how he feels that their game in the offensive zone is not up to par. Um, the term he used and the term his players have been using, because he's clearly using it with them, is that they're dying with the puck too often. in the corners in the offensive zone. Now, what that means is, because I asked him what it means, I have an idea of what it means, but I wanted to hear it from him. So he's like, basically, if you're first on puck, if that leads to nothing, if that just leads to a turnover, that's dying with the puck. It means you were there first, you got the first touch. That should invariably lead to a second touch and to offensive zone time that allows you to get into your offense. And so when that doesn't happen, that's a missed opportunity. And he made sure to point out that that's not always on the guy getting the first touch. More often than not, it's on the other guys not being where they're supposed to be when that first touch happens. And um, that's something that you can fine tune, and that's something that the Canadians are well aware of. Nick Suzuki, after like he was done talking about the heroics and him setting up the goal and him joking that I hadn't scored on any of my chances in overtime, so I'm going to get it to the puck. I'm going to get the puck to the guy who's going to score, kind of thing. Um, Fun vibes, but take a cold look at the way these games are playing out, and he knows, that they have a lot more, they have a much higher level to get to, and that's primarily in the offensive zone. Um,
I think
and so
that
it's
the Newark line is a good example of play dying down early.
yes, yeah, I mean, yes, and that coupled with their inability to win a draw is why that line's metrics are so terrible, right? I mean, they really have some of the worst possession and expected goal numbers and everything. Like that's all the advanced data tells you that that line's not working. Um, I asked Marty about that before the game on Thursday, and he's like, "Well, I don't think the eye test really fits that. It's very early in the season. The sample size is small. I wouldn't pay too much attention to the data. The game in Chicago skewed that because we were on the power play so much. The captain didn't play much and whatever. But it's something that it's an area where the team can improve. If you tweak that a little bit, what can you get more out of Demidov if he's playing with different players, or if you just swap in one player, if you put Demidov on the dock line with Bolduc, or if you put Bolduc on a line with Kapanen and Demidov, does that spark something? Who knows? But I think he's reluctant to touch the dock line because it's working so well, and Doc himself is playing some pretty good hockey and is seems to be gradually improving as the
Yeah.
season goes along. Um, and one of the reasons behind that, and what the reason why Marty put Bolduc and Gallagher with him is their direct style is going to allow him to ease into the season a little bit. So, but yeah, there's a lot of things that could improve offensively, and the power play is another one, which we talked extensively about the last episode. Um, but they're 4-1-0. Like
That's it.
it's really like, I mean, it's
Yeah.
and this is what
Well,
I think
it
the
used to
challenge.
be back in the days when the Canadians were a dynasty. Scotty Bowman was famously, was famous for being the hardest on their team when they had a
After
great record.
wins, and
Right.
after, yeah, particularly
So
after wins, yeah.
you make sure that you keep them on their toes. I guess that's a little bit part of the spirit here of pointing out things that they can do better. Um, but I thought, when you asked him about being better offensively, I think it was last night, Marty went back to this idea of attacking a zone defense
Yes.
versus a man-to-man defense. Um, and he had done that when I asked him earlier in the week about Demidov. So perhaps this is an illustration of the youth of the team. But when it came to Demidov in particular, he said that it was about understanding where the pockets of open ice are in the offensive zone, and versus a zone defense, those pockets are more like in between opposing players. Whereas against man-to-man defense, you shouldn't be afraid to try to attack it and go past your coverage, as long as you don't expose the puck and you know that you're fairly in a good you have good chances of success doing it. But it's not just Demidov. Obviously, it's something that he considers to be a team challenge right now.
Yes. And what I think is a challenge for him, particularly now. So, the Rangers are in here tomorrow night. They're 4-1-0. And I think previous versions of Martin St. Louis, and he's admitted getting sucked in by this, has been, I would say, had his eyes blurred a bit by results. He insists on being a more process-oriented person. I think he generally is, but I think at times in his coaching career, previous times in his coaching career, he's been reluctant to do a whole lot if the results are there, despite a poor process. And I think he's learned from those situations because oftentimes getting results despite a poor process invariably led to a losing streak and even at times like mini crises and just things that he needed to address and like projects of fixing the forecheck or doing this or
Yeah.
doing that, these things happened. They showed themselves before they actually manifested themselves in bad results. And so right now he's at a point where you can look at the last two games and again, I don't think the process was all bad. Defensively the process was actually quite good.
Yes.
um, but at what point do you start, to use his favorite word, at what point do you start proactively addressing the offense and say maybe my mix up front of forwards is not quite perfect, and do I change lines even though we've won 4 games in a row? Like the standard, um, I'm going to be very interested to see what happens at the morning skate tomorrow if he starts tweaking things up front, despite the fact that they're winning games and despite the
Mm.
fact that they're generally playing well. Like they all acknowledge that there's a better version of them in them. Um, to what extent is Martin willing to tweak the power play units? At what point is he willing to tweak the lines? Maybe doing what I just mentioned earlier, like try and get Demidov into a better situation, try and address the fact that that line is getting buried pretty much night after night. Um, and as well as Patrick Laine played last night, I thought he played a really good game last night. He was really good, but it's quite obvious that he is the oil to the vinegar of Jake Evans and Josh Anderson. Like he is not someone who, I know oil and vinegar goes well together, but they separate, right? That's my point. Like, I guess that's a bad analogy, but anyhow, um, he just does not fit their style of game. And I had a conversation with Anderson about that yesterday morning before the game. And oh no, it was at practice on Wednesday. And he was just like, we have to do a better job of getting him to understand where we need the puck to get in on the forecheck so that we can get in on the forecheck and get him the puck in areas where he can score. We need to do a better job of that. I was like, well, you need to do a better job of that. You just have to get him to throw pucks deep and let you go get them. Why? What does that have to do with you? He's like, well, yes, he needs to understand that, but I think we can. There are things that we can do that would make it more obvious to him that that's what he should do. For instance, if he's carrying the puck to the neutral zone, if I skate near him, it becomes obvious that if you just chip it off the wall into the corner, I have the momentum to go get it. Whereas if I'm on the other side of the ice, maybe he doesn't see it quite as well. So maybe that's an adjustment I can make. Maybe I can get closer to him so he sees that I have speed and I'm going to beat the defense to that puck if he puts it there. But it just seems like a combination that's not destined to work in the long term, right? It's just not the style of player Patrick Laine is, um, to just throw pucks in deep and go get on the forecheck as those guys do. So I think there's a whole bunch of situations like that among the forward groups. At some point, we have to talk about like the fact that Slav doesn't look that great or hasn't been all that dangerous. I should say it's not that he doesn't look great, but he's not creating situations where he's a threat, and so all these
But again,
things.
I think that their record allows them to be patient. It allows them to. It's buying them some time to
Well, that's
let
what I
Slav figure things out, and the Evans Anderson line to find some chemistry. Because let's face it, well, otherwise, where are you going to put Line? So it's
No, I
an
understand that,
eternal
but
problem.
it's yes, on one hand it does allow them to be patient. On the other hand, has the standard for this team changed enough where a 4-1-0 record does not allow you to be patient, where you say, no, this is a problem, we're going to address it. I don't care if we've won 4 games in a row.
Mm-hmm.
We have to address this. And I, I I'm curious to see how that's handled. And I'm curious to see if that's where the standard has gone to, where results don't dictate patience, and instead they dictate a lack of patience or a desire to get ahead of a problem before it becomes one.
Okay, so I don't want to sound like an anti-Liney, but there was two exercises that I have not done yet. Maybe that I invite our listeners to do that. The first one would be if you were to replace him with Veleno, and you're tasked with reimagining the lines. Maybe that you come up with different mixes, significantly different mixes than if Line is there, and for instead of Veleno or instead of any other guy for that matter. And the other exercise would be on the power play, because the power play has not really been clicking. And if you are to play Patrick Laine, might as well use him as much as you can on the power play.
100%.
Uh, I know that Marty's in an ideal world, he would like to keep the Suzuki line intact, 5-on-5 and on the power play. It makes things easier for the flow of
Mhm.
the game. But would that be very crazy to have Liney on the first unit and have Cole as the shooter on the second unit? Like switch the two guys?
I'd like to see Cole as the shooter on the first unit before we do that. Like I mean, it's like,
Yeah, yeah. It seems as though right now in the current scheme, he doesn't even need Line on his unit to be a bit wasted in
well,
his
that's
with his
it. And
talent. Yeah,
so,
that's a good
and
point.
that's another case where, maybe you do need patience because that setup is new. And I think everyone in that setup is getting used to their new roles. And it was kind of interesting last night, their first power play. Uh, the only person on that unit who was in their normal spot, quote unquote, which had been their normal spot all season to that point, they weren't there. I think on the first power play, they had like Bodzuka in the right circle, Suzuki was in the bumper, Caulfield was in his
Yeah.
shooter spot. Like they had switched everything up, which I think they should do more. Like they shouldn't just roll out the same look every single time. They do have the option to go back to Suzuki at the right circle, Caulfield on the left circle, and however else you want to organize it. But Bodzuk bumper, Slav goal line, like the traditional sort of setup that they've had, or just don't send the same look out. So I thought that was an interesting adjustment
Well,
against Nashville. Didn't work necessarily, but
you
it's
say
they
it's
are
a, is
they are they are changing things.
yeah, but you say it's their traditional setup. I mean, how much have we seen that setup? Like the guys in the specific positions that you describe, since Budzik has arrived and he's supposed to be like a good solution at the bumper position. I mean that I feel as though from one power play to the next, you see them move around. Sure, it's disconcerting for the other team, but at some point you need to have a primary setup where everybody's comfortable, and I feel
Oh,
as
I
though
think
their need to change and be unpredictable makes it so that they don't have a formula right now that they've identified, at least with Boldzuk on that first unit, where they say, okay, this is our setup A, we know that this works, it can be effective, and now let's develop setup B, C, and D to to create chaos for the other team. I'd
yeah,
like
no,
to,
I understand that, and but again, this is I don't want to get back into the power play, but this is just an example of adjustments that you can make despite a 4-1-0 record, and so like I
yeah.
think like you talked about, you started with Line, like let's say you take him out. I would like At some point I would like to see Line on a line with Demidov to see if the ultimate finisher on the team can benefit from Demidov's vision. That's I'd be curious about that before, because it's obvious that Veleno would be a better fit with Anderson and Evans, right? Like that would actually be a really good fourth line. Like it's like a really high end fourth line, and Veleno fits that. Um, also has a good amount of skill and is not just a it's not just a forecheck and grind guy. But the point being is that is Marty going to allow 4 wins in 5 games to just ride it out and only make adjustments when a loss predicates it, or will he get ahead of it? And I think that's, to me, I guess the next step in his coaching journey is separating his concerns from the wins and losses that are on the standings.
Yeah,
I mean,
I doubt it. I doubt it.
he's openly saying their offensive zone play has not been good enough.
Hmm.
Is that because of the line combinations? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just because they haven't worked on it enough. Maybe it's because they haven't emphasized. He seems to think that's the case, but and he really did kind of poo-poo the notion that the Kapanen line, damn it, the Kapanen lines,
Hey,
the cap,
take it to Michel Lacroix.
it's
Yesterday,
done.
he says Kapanen.
He
So
did say Kapanen.
I know.
I'm gonna take it to Oliver Kapanen himself or Kapanen or whatever it is. I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna go to the source. Anyhow, the fact that their underlying numbers are so poor, it is early in the season, so I think Marty's answer was fair that don't read too much into data at this point. I think he only starts looking at it 10, 15, even 20 games into the season. Um, but he did say we're going to keep monitoring it. And so
Yeah,
like as you monitor it, at what point do you decide, okay, the eye test is starting to match what the numbers are showing. I need to do something about this. And the fact that the team's brightest young forward talent, let's be honest, I think we can fairly call him that. The kid with the really the superstar potential in the NHL is on that line, and that pucks are dying in the corner on his line is not ideal. So maybe
yeah,
find a solution for that.
right. Okay, let's move on because I think there's potentially a
We had a
movie that
plan.
we've seen before.
Oh,
A that would be a Caden Guhle injury. We'll wait till
uh,
you hear to get some news about that, but it didn't look great. Um,
he did not go to
in
the room. That
no,
was encouraging.
he didn't play the second half of the third period. That's less
No,
encouraging.
yeah,
So, and I thought on the moment that he had hurt his groin the way that because it had been bothering him during training camp, and there seems to be because he didn't
he
receive
didn't practice
any.
all week. He didn't practice Wednesday. He did not skate Thursday morning.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah,
so
it's bothering
there,
him.
yeah, and so when he fell, had a hard time getting up. So I thought of that first, but when he briefly went back to the ice to just to test out his legs, he went over the boards, and it would have been if it was the groin. It would have been the tough part would not have been to skate it out. It would have been to go over the boards,
Right.
and
Yes.
he did, and that didn't seem to be too much of an issue. So maybe there's something else bothering him. So let's hope. On the one hand, Guhle has been plagued with a lot of bad luck when it comes to injuries. But there's
Mhm.
been, among those injuries, there's been times where we thought it was serious, and he surprised us with a miraculous comeback, and he did not end up missing any time. But in the event that he was to miss any any time at all, um, I think that it presents the Canadians with a challenge, and two guys in particular with an interesting opportunity. Uh, Jaden Struble had a very good game
Mhm.
against Nashville. And the more I think of it, in this eternal, perennial competition he's got with Arbor Xhekaj, one thing that Struble has as an ace up his sleeve is that if the situation demands it, he can be elevated in a top four role for a brief period. A little bit like Brett Kulak was back in the day with the Canadiens. He's a third pairing guy, but you can put him with Lane Hudson and it can work. Xhekaj has not shown that so far that he can be elevated into a top four role and play 17 minutes. Let's say I know that Struble did not play that much yesterday,
Mhm.
but I mean, I looked at the stats with a bit, Lane and Struble together last year. Their expected goals percentage was almost a 60%, 59.77. That's all of last year. They had
Struble was Hudson's best partner, and from a
yeah.
pure metric standpoint, yes.
So if you know that this works in the short term, it allows you to keep Matheson and Dobson together, which has been working very well.
Yeah.
Uh, and you're not stretching too much of your third pairing. And if there are defensive situations that demand it, you can also put Carrier with Hudson in specific moments in the game, and put Lane back on the left side for a bit. They did not play all that much together, Carrier and Hudson, like something like 60 minutes or so last year, but they
Mm.
also had a 60.2 expected goals differential, or percentage, should I say. So in both cases, Hudson has been faring well with those two D partners. So in the event Guhle goes down for X period of time, there are other options that are available to Martin Saint Louis and Stéphane Robida to keep the defense afloat. And that could be the opportunity that Jaden Struble needs to finally, run away with it.
Well, yeah, and it's the biggest loser last year in the Alex Carrier trade was Jaden Struble, right? I mean, that was really the guy who paid the price for Carrier's arrival, knocked him out of the lineup. It was tough for him to get back in, I thought last night it would have been very tempting for him to be like, I'm going to show them that that I'm indispensable, that they need to keep me in the lineup. I'm going to blow people up. I'm going to go around looking for hits. I'm going to go try and create offense. I'm going to do something. He did none of that. He honestly did nothing out of the ordinary. He did nothing that uh, went above and beyond what he was being asked to do. He just played a simple game, and he was very effective at it. But I agree with you that the Hudson Struble pairing, when I saw it for a few shifts in a row, kind of midway through the second period, which came as a result of penalty kills and whatever. Like, I mean, they were coming off a penalty kill, so I think the initial time they went out together was because Guhle had just been on the PK, but then they went out together again,
Yeah.
and it was Guhle carrying, and then so I'm like, okay, well that's not because of the PK, that's because you did it again for no, you weren't forced to. Um, I actually quickly chatted about this with Stefan Robit. I caught him on his way out of the building last night, and I just asked him, and he's like, he did say it was primarily because of the penalty kills that happened, but they do know how effective Struble was with Hudson last year. That's something that they have in their back pocket. And I agree that it is a real benefit to Struble that they know that, because
Yeah.
you're not putting Xhekaj with Hudson. It's not really something they would ever consider doing. So it's the fact that they are not only comfortable, but that they know that Struble performed extremely well with Hudson um, last season for a stretch. It wasn't that long. They didn't play a ton of minutes together, but they played long enough where the numbers aren't meaningless. Like it's enough of a sample where the numbers mean something. They don't mean everything, but the fact that they were close to a 60% expected goal ratio when on the ice together, but I think um, more tangibly, or more like from an eye test perspective, I remember that time when they were playing together and they just seemed to fit together. So um,
It's
I feel like
324 minutes
that's it. It's not a
together.
huge sample, but it's big enough where the numbers have some meaning. So
Right.
I should say that I don't think if the Guhle injury were serious, I don't think he would spend the rest of the game watching from the bench. I don't think he would have gone for a twirl on the ice to test it out. It doesn't appear that serious. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is all for naught, but it's not all for naught in the sense that, the Rangers are coming to town. Matt Rempe plays for the Rangers, and this is I was on George Larac's show before recording, and he asked me the question. He's like, do you put Xhekaj in case Rempe decides to run amok and just to keep him in check? And it's not a terrible question. I know George likes to think in these terms because he was that guy forever, but it's not it's not unreasonable in this case. Rempe is enough of a disruptor that even in his limited 10, 12 minutes, whatever he plays, that he can become a factor in that way. And so
Mm-hmm.
Xhekaj has that going for him. Struble has this going for him. And I would argue that in the grand scheme of things, Struble having in his back pocket that he's a good partner for Lane Hudson is a more valuable thing to have than Xhekaj's ability to keep the peace and calm enforcers down on the other side, because there aren't that many enforcers left in the league. The Rangers happen to have one of them.
Yeah, Rampy is actually playing more than
Playing
11 minutes so far.
playing
It's
pretty good
pretty good.
hockey, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that there's a. I like the fact that when Struble's in the lineup, there's a bit more of a mix and match option. I know that Marty after the game also talked about the fact that you can change the D pairings to make sure that you don't have two lefties in for defensive faceoffs on the right side. That
Hmm.
that gets very technical at that point, but I mean, I guess that goes into the explanation too. Um, but you don't. I feel when Struble is playing the way that he can, he's less of a concern. He's less risky. He can manage his risk better than Xhekaj, who has got obviously this dimension that no other defenseman has, not even Struble, and
Hmm.
that makes him a very tantalizing player to have in your lineup. But when you mentioned the game against Seattle, where Samuel Montembeault had, two shots that he wished he had back, there was also two goals that were directly or indirectly coming from Xhekaj when, after making a great move to try to set up, I think it was the meet-off, but it
With
ended up being
Demidov
an
at the
icing.
offensive blue line, yeah, and it went. He just missed
And
the pass.
yeah,
Jack guy missed the pass, not Demidov. It was.
but shortly after, I mean, the following whistle, I mean, he lost his guy, turned into a goal. And
Mhm.
previously, there seemed to be like mixed assignments on the PK
I
between
think
him
that
and
was on
Dobson.
Dobson. I think that was on Dobson personally,
More than
but
him, yeah, okay.
yeah, I think Dobson was a bit too high. Dobson was the bottom man on the diamond basically, and he was high up in the slot, too high, and he I think he's supposed to be there. I haven't asked anyone about this, but I think he's supposed to be there to cut off that pass to Schwartz and not Jack Guy come down from like where he is, closer to the circle on the diamond. I don't know if that was his guy, but anyhow.
Mhm.
But sorry, but point taken, he was on the ice. He'd been on the ice for 33 seconds. It was his first real intentional penalty kill shift, and 33 seconds left, they score. So 33 seconds later, they score. So it didn't go well for him. And it's funny, I was talking to him Tuesday morning about that,
Yeah,
about the fact that we thought he would be on the PK this year and we hadn't seen him, and so he was kind of like, yeah, like, I knew in training camp that Dobson was going to be on the PK, so you guys might not have known, but I always knew that I was the next guy on the PK. Like, I always knew that I would only go in if one of our PK guys got a penalty. And he explained in Chicago the reason he didn't go in when Guhle was hurt, or when Guhle was in the box. I'm like instinctually saying when Guhle was hurt.
it's okay.
Yeah, when Guhle was in the box was because he had been sitting for so long because there's so many power plays in that game that they didn't want to put him in a bad spot. Like after he'd been sitting on the bench for like 10 minutes of real time or 15 minutes of real time, to go in there and all of a sudden be asked to kill a penalty when you're cold, was not something they wanted to do. So that kind of explained that. But then, so that penalty kill, which was Mike Matheson was in the box, and so he went and replaced Matheson with Dobson, and then 33 seconds later, the Kraken score. Not his fault, but circumstances made it so that that opened a door for Struble to get in the lineup. And I think I don't know. I find this to be an interesting kind of test. Like if Gooley's okay and the decision's not made for them, can you go up to Struble and say, "Listen, you played really well last game, but we're going to put Jack Guy in because we're scared of that guy Rempe, and we want him to take care of him." Like I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how you have that conversation. It wouldn't be fair to Struble. Like he did everything. He did everything to play to get another game.
right.
But the interesting dynamic in
Yeah,
both of
but
them.
you can also look, you can see it, you can make it a team test and say you got this dude on the other side who's wrecking havoc everywhere he goes these days.
Mhm.
And but let's see how the team toughness reacts. What how do you guys play when Arbor's not in the lineup and you have to face a guy like that?
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
It's it can be that sort of mentality. Because you can talk about the pack mentality and team toughness and all that and being you know elbows up,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
But if your biggest guy is not
Hmm.
there to protect everybody else, that becomes that much truer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So put it to the test.
Yeah. Yes. It's going to be an interesting decision. It's
Yeah,
so. But I think this is the crux of what Struble and Xhekaj will have to live with probably all season. Until an injury makes it so that that's not the case. How well do you handle the fact that you have no margin for error?
yeah,
How do you play under those conditions? I thought Struble did an excellent job of that last night because he didn't put himself in a position to make errors. And not saying that Xhekaj did, but when you know that the slightest mistake could mean that you're sitting the next game, it's hard not to make mistakes in that kind of
yeah.
environment. And so this is going to be their challenge all season. So we'll see how they handle it. And honestly, uh, Struble got an excellent grade, his first test of it, because he wants to stay in the lineup. It would have been really easy for him to go and say, "Here's why I need to stay in the lineup," and he did that, but in a different way, in a more effective way, by playing just an efficient game.
Yeah, it's I find it a bit unfortunate because I think that overall Struble's got more to bring, but that element that Jack has, I mean, you love it. You want you want that for
And
your
the
team,
and the
And so
reality is,
it's really being between a rock and a hard place.
it is, and you know, you kind of really want it in the playoffs too. Like there's generally not fighting in the playoffs. Obviously, the Canadian Capitals fought in the playoffs last year, but there's generally not fighting in the playoffs. But it's that kind of presence, the sheer heaviness of Xhekaj, like when he hits, it hurts.
Yeah,
That's something you want in the playoffs. And so to get him to a level where he can play in the playoffs, I think from a really big picture standpoint,
sure.
that's his edge on Struble.
Yeah,
Is you want Xhekaj's style in a playoff lineup more so than you want Struble's style. Even though Struble can play a very hard game, and Struble's feet are better. There's a lot that Struble brings that Xhekaj doesn't. But the thing that Xhekaj brings that no one else does is what you want in your lineup in the playoffs. And so that's the mountain that Struble has to climb.
it's no surprise that this internal competition and this debate has been raging for 2 years on now, because it's there's no easy answer to it.
There is no easy answer to it, and until Xhekaj makes himself indispensable and makes it impossible for Marty to take him out of the lineup, this will continue, whether it's with Struble or someone else even. Who knows who? But it could be. Well, actually, I can't think of even like Engstrom wouldn't be. I guess he would be. I suppose at some point maybe contrasting styles, but yeah, maybe it would be a debate. Do you get the puck moving Engstrom in or the rock hard physical Xhekaj in? Or
Mm.
it's the ball is kind of in Xhekaj's court. He's been given he's been given the inside track to that job. He played in that position all through training camp, started the season in that position. They want him to succeed in that position. They feel like he adds an element that is unique and that they lack. And so they want him to succeed in that position. And so he has to make it so that he does succeed and makes it impossible for them to take him out. And as much as it wasn't his fault, and as much as I think he's played good hockey by and large all season, and the goals that he was on the ice for, except for that McCann goal, which was a pretty important goal. But that's happened on a few occasions this season where his man Calle Jarnkrok in opening night, Xhekaj's man, didn't tie up
Yeah,
the stick, didn't eliminate him, scores. And so he can't have that. He can't have it's a slim margin, but he has no margin. So that's his reality, and he knows it.
if he was just reaching a point where without being all of the all of his profile being better than Struble in every way, but if he can only reach a point where 5 on 5 he can be sent out there without any afterthoughts from the coaches, and they
Hmm.
feel secure enough, say, yeah, sure, no problem, take your regular turn. That would be that'd be good, But I feel as though they're gauging the situation. Is it a good time to send him? No, we're holding him back this time. We're in the lead, we're behind, etc.
Yeah,
There's 4 minutes left in the period. There's a lot of management to his shifts. And ideally, you just want to get to a point where you can have your regular shift and that you're reliable enough that you're not weary of the next mistake, and that mistakes will happen. That's okay. But you're not you're not making it you're not managing the player, reminding him that that mistakes are around the corner and you might commit one. So because that the whole aspect about his toughness in the playoffs, you don't want to lose that. And I'm sure that if he was ever put on the market and shopped around, there's plenty of teams that would be interested
it would be a
in,
long line.
yeah,
There would be
of
a
teams
long line.
interested in what he provides.
I will always remember the conversation I had with a pro scout about Josh Anderson a couple of years ago, and where he asked me if the Canadiens would ever be interested in moving Josh Anderson. And I was like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure. Why would you want him? This was what in the midst of his nightmarish season. And he turns to me and goes, guys like us, and he points around Scouts Row, guys like guys like him. And Xhekaj to me is that kind of guy. Guys like us, like guys like him. And so, yeah, should be we should point out since we're talking about the defense, and this is how I'm going to segue to our next topic. But Lane Hudson is back.
Yeah.
The version of Lane Hudson we saw while the contract dispute was going on is very different from the Lane Hudson we've seen since the contract was signed. The last two games, he has been his regular, dynamic, borderline dominant self. He's back. He's all of that behind him, and so you know Monday we did an insert, or we recorded a top to the podcast because Hudson's contract was announced after we had recorded. What we didn't do is record a whole other episode after Jeff Molson extended Jeff Gorton and Ken Hughes the following day on Tuesday, again on the day of the home opener, to 5-year extensions, meaning they are here, they're under contract at least for the next 6 seasons. The timing was pretty perfect. They handled the Hudson file quite deftly. They've just like they've handled so many other files so far, and I think we don't have to debate whether that's a good idea or not. That I think we both agree that that's a good idea and that this is deserved, for them to be extended. But
Yes.
one of my, you look at the discourse around the Canadians right now. What I found unfortunate for a long time, and this goes even dates back further than them making the Stanley Cup final. Like I think even when they did make the Stanley Cup final, the Canadians were not relevant in the NHL. No one cared about the Canadians. No one talked about the Canadians. They weren't interesting to anyone but Canadians fans.
Yeah.
They are relevant in the NHL right now. They're not a top team, but they're interesting. People talk about them. They are part of the national discourse of the NHL. They look at Hudson, they look at Demidov, they look at Caulfield scoring all these goals, Suzuki emerging. There's all these interesting stories. They make the biggest trade of the offseason and getting Dobson, they are a relevant team. And I think the one thing, no, not the one thing, one of the main things that Jeff Gorton and Ken Hughes have successfully managed to do is to make the Canadians relevant again. And they've done it in a relatively short period of time. And I think that in and of itself and that alone merited an extension for those two guys, because they've put the Canadians back into the national discourse again, and they deserve recognition for that.
Well, it's because you've seen other teams rebuilding, and they took 7, 8, 9 years to rebuild, and are
14 in the case of the Sabres and
gosh,
counting.
that rebuild, tearing it down again,
Yeah,
rebuilding, tearing it down again. Uh, yeah, but I mean, a team like Arizona/Utah, that they've
yeah,
been at it for a long time, and other teams too. The speed of the Canadians rebuild, even compared to in division
Edmonton,
rivals like Detroit and Ottawa,
right.
it's been faster. It's a fast rebuild, and I think that really strikes, from the ashes of the 2022 season to what they are now.
Mm.
It's a speedy recovery. When someone's sick and you wish them a speedy recovery,
Yeah,
in the hockey terms, that's as speedy a recovery as you could hope for a team that decides to rebuild. And not all of their moves have necessarily paid off, but the global result is definitely there. The not the end that's in sight, but the payoff is in sight. I think that Jeff Molson, not in those exact terms, but pretty much said
so we can
that.
see it. We can see it coming now, is what he said.
Yeah,
Those are the exact terms he used.
yeah,
Yes, we
that's
can
it.
see it coming now.
And when you're the owner and you chose a plan and you can see it coming now,
Mm.
well, that validates your plan, and
Yeah,
it validates the people who put it in place, who stuck with it, who did not deviate from it from 1 year to the next, saying, "Oh, let's try this, let's try that, let's veer into this direction." They've stuck with it, and they're being patient too. That's something that Jeff Gorton mentioned, how the team at this point, especially in order to make their next moves, needed to be patient. And it's funny how it sort of intersects now between the discourse of management and what's happening on the ice,
Mhm.
because Martin St. Louis also talks about being patient and waiting for your chances. That's exactly what Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes are doing right now.
Yeah,
They're
that's a good
staying
point.
patient, waiting for their chances. And so there's really a marriage, uh, yeah, connection between the two, and we were hoping for that point to arrive, because gone are the days where the team was trying to win games and management was almost secretly hoping that they would lose.
Mm.
That's thankfully behind us. Um, but there's still a lot of work to be done to move the ball further down the field, and I think that you know, choosing what to do with Mike Matheson will be one of the biggest tasks that they've got in that sense, because it's going to be a test of a guy who will be in the old, he's reaching the end of his deal. He can choose to go on the market and use the credentials that he got first in Pittsburgh, but mainly while a member of the Montreal Canadiens, and try to shop that around with teams that that look for top four defensemen. They're hard to find. He's proven that he's become a lot more reliable than he was when in his first years in the league. He's got clear qualities that are very attractive. He's become a more complete defenseman. So he could turn that into valuable dollars. So it's one
Mhm.
thing to try to convince your young players in their second contract. And in the case of Lane Hudson, a guy who has got no arbitration rights, who cannot receive an offer sheet, who's got not real leverage apart from his own talent.
Mhm.
Um, in a negotiation, it's one thing to convince those kids to say, you know what, let's leave a bit of money on the table and let's build a winner altogether. That's kudos to Kent. He's been able to do that. That's part of the reasons why they've been successful. Um, but now you would have to convince a 31-year-old veteran who would most likely get a better offer if he decided to go on the market, and say, "You really want to stay here, huh? You're from Montreal. You feel like you're playing at home. You want to stay here. Well, we want to have you. Fine, we want to keep you, but here's going to be our number." And I feel as though it would be a they would need a bit of convincing for Mike Matheson to accept either less years, but more likely more years and less AAV.
Yeah, I think in his case, this is going to be Mike Matheson's third contract. You remember that he signed an 8-year deal out of entry level back when the Florida Panthers were giving out 8-year deals to everyone. Basically, they were trying to lock in a young core. Um, everyone knows that Kent Hughes negotiated that contract as Matheson's agent. He- Mike Matheson is severely underpaid right now.
Yes.
Has been for a while now, probably since his time in Pittsburgh. Um, and so in a lot of cases, we dealt with one in Max Pacioretty. I think recently Brad Marchand had the same mindset, is that when you've been on a very team-friendly contract for a long time, you're hoping that the next contract will make up for it, right? And so I don't know if Mike Matheson has that in his mind or not. We do know that he wants to stay. He's never really said at what cost he wants to stay, or what he's willing to sacrifice in order to stay. Um, that 8-year contract was worth $39 million, which of course is a phenomenal amount of money for any of us. But in terms of a hockey player, it's not a huge figure. It's not in terms of career earnings. It's not something that uh, it's something that you would want to top up, right? And so I have no doubt in my mind that if Mike Matheson hit the open market, he could easily get $7.5 million a year, maybe even eight. I don't know. Um, I also have no doubt in my mind the Canadians probably couldn't offer him that. So I guess the trick is going to be, can the Canadians compensate with term to get Mike Matheson to a total dollar figure at the end of his contract that would be similar to what he could get on a shorter term contract on the open market, because he will be 32 in February, if I'm not mistaken. Um, how many teams are going to be willing to offer a 6-year deal to a 32-year-old defenseman who really is very reliant on his feet? Um, there might be some teams that see that as a red flag, since he's such a fluid, beautiful skater. I personally think that he's not going to lose that skating, because a lot of it comes from just how smooth his glide is, which is, I'm not a skating expert, but you could just see the way he moves on the ice uh, is effortless. So it's probably going to end. He's also the best conditioned guy on the team, and I think anyone on the Canadians would say so. So he has a chance of making a 6 or even 7-year deal not insane, that he would still be useful at the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
So can you get him to, let's say he were to command 5 years at 8 million a year. Let's just say, I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's realistic or not, but let's just say as a free agent and he leaves Montreal, that's what he can get. That's $40 million. So how do you get Mike Matheson to $40 million over a 6 or 7 year term? And that's how you could convince him that, and then you get to retire as a Montreal Canadian, basically. Like, that would take you right to retirement, and you would have played, what will have been, like, you know 9 or 10 years for your hometown team, and possibly seen it, perhaps win a Stanley Cup over that time. The way things are trending, it wouldn't be hard to convince them that you could take part in the first Canadian Stanley Cup parade since 1993 and do it down the street of your hometown. But we've talked about the role that he might play over the course of that contract. We've talked about, would he be willing to accept a third pairing role eventually? I think that's a factor here. But all of this is going to need to be is coming to a head because of how well he's played, and it's only 5 games. And we mentioned it on the last episode. At that point it was 3 games, and we said, I think I said, we've seen Mike Matheson play 3 games, 3 great games before. It's what happens when he's not playing great that people start freaking out about. But this dossier is going to be an interesting one, and I don't think they're going to rush into it, because I think they are going to wait and see, can he sustain this level of play over a long stretch of time.
Yeah. But when you referred to our previous discussion about that on the podcast, I think we were answering your question about Reinbacher and Engstrom.
Yeah.
But I think that the other person that it might affect in that whole equation is Alexandre Carrier. Because, you know, I know that one of your lines is to say that the top four is set for years to come, and you include Reinbacher in there. I
Hmm.
think that we're a little bit counting the chickens before they hatch when we insert Reinbacher there, because it's not done yet, So, and it might take some time before it happens. But if it ever does happen, I think he's not going to graduate to the NHL and become on the first day a top four defenseman. He could very well be a third pairing defenseman for a while,
Hmm.
allowing Matheson to regain his role or retain his role on the top four. So if you have Reinbacher as a third pairing guy for a couple of years before he he naturally moves to the top forward role, well then the guy who's affected the most by that is Alexandre Carrier, who's got
Right.
2 years left in his deal.
Hmm.
So if you end up at some point during a long term deal to Matheson, if you end up to a point where Matheson is still a relevant top four guy and Reinbacher shows that he's ready for more, well, then you have five very good defensemen, and it's a luxury to have them. And how many of those 84 games in the season are you going to play with your top six regular defensemen there anyway?
Hmm.
Um, I think that it would be, and that's way down the line, it might be a good problem to have. So I'm not sure that it can be as high the potential of Reinbacher can be. I really don't think that they're in a position right now with how Matheson, how well he plays, and how unsure we still remain with Reinbacher, that they can move away from Matheson thinking we got a replacement, we've got an internal option that's waiting in the wings. He's not just yet. So I'm much more comfortable than I was a year ago, maybe, to say, you know what, they should keep this guy, especially if he's playing with Dobson, because Dobson is part of Matheson's success.
Yeah.
There's that connection there, and the fact that the level of talent that brings his minutes down to, that's another factor. But if we ever come to a point where whether Matheson is top four or on the third pairing, whether Reinbacher is top four or third pairing, it wouldn't matter because there's a bunch of good defensemen and there's money for everybody. That's a great problem to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you
It's,
have if you need to find, you said 40 million, can you beat 40 million in the open market and find a way to keep him in Montreal at that
I mean,
total amount?
7 years times 6 million would get you there. But that's
Yeah,
40, that's 42 million for 7 years. That would take him through age 39, I guess. Something like that.
right.
Yeah.
Or you can divide 40 by 6 and come up to 6.67 million, which is even better.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that it's doable, but it's just a matter of how much more with Matheson want to get on the open market. That's one thing. But to me, it's not true that on day one after he leaves, he's going to be replaced by an equal option. I doubt it.
Oh no, he won't. That's for
He won't.
sure. Even when I was saying, even when I'm saying the top four appear set in stone, it's pretty obvious at this point that that's not happening next season, and it might not even happen the season after. So it's like
Well, season after, I
yeah,
mean, they'll be in serious business by then.
they will exactly. So it is fair to say that they will need something in the interim for sure. Whether
Hmm.
that's Mike Matheson or whether that's someone else, they're not going to have that set top four imminently. It's going to take time, and Pascal Vincent said it plainly. Like even physically, Reinbacher needs time to develop physically. Like it's going to take time. This is it's. I thought he was really lucid when he said that in rookie camp, and I think he intentionally did that. Just to tell all of the Canadiens fans, yes, this guy's a very promising player. Yes, he has great potential. Yes, he has a future on this team, but you're going to have to wait. It's going to take some time. And if he keeps getting injured, then it's just going to, every time he gets injured, it just adds on the amount of time it's going to take for him to be ready. So yeah, I think it's a delicate file, so these guys got signed to an extension. This is a delicate file to handle. And, you were in Buffalo when they had that conversation with Matheson at the combine.
Yeah.
His wife's from Buffalo, so I mean he was there anyway, but it's rare that a player talks to management about contracts and stuff without their agent present with it, and it be like a cordial conversation where they're just each side is sort of fleshing out what they think. Obviously, that was before the Dobson trade. I think that was even before the Canadians knew Noah Dobson was on the trade market. They didn't even know that was a possibility at the time, and that changes everything. The Dobson trade changes the Canadians' context when it comes to Mike Matheson in a huge way. Because if you say that, well, Matheson's going to need to be replaced, there's a world where you could say, well, he already has been replaced. They have Noah Dobson. He's
Yeah.
like the new Mike Matheson, but he's clearly a better Noah Dobson with Mike Matheson playing with him than and vice versa. So that the fact that this partnership is a thing and the fact that it appears to be going so well is the best thing that could have happened to Mike Matheson if he wants to stay in Montreal.
I got a juicy question for you.
Oh
So
boy.
let's say they want to extend Mike Matheson, and they do. Do you think that makes David Reinbacher a trade candidate?
I am not convinced that this administration is going to trade David Reinbacher until they know something about him. They seem very reluctant to include him in any. They've been approached about David Reinbacher on a few occasions at least. Like it's been something. It is something that teams ask about, or he is someone that teams ask about. And I don't think this administration, the biggest risk they took was drafting David Reinbacher. It was the biggest thing they did that left them open to criticism. And they knew they were going to get criticized for that pick, and they did it anyway. And they did it because they had a strong belief in him. They had a strong belief on some of the other guys that were available, one of whom is playing for the Philadelphia Flyers right now and is getting benched at times. But anyhow, you know, they knew the whole market wanted Matvei Michkov, and they went with Reinbacher anyway. And they, I think, want to have every opportunity to be proven right that they did that. And this is the danger that some administrations get in is when, they fall in love with their own draft picks. Well, I don't, I'm not convinced they would trade David Reinbacher until at least they see him play a healthy season professionally in North America. That's the bare minimum before they make
Yeah.
any decision whatsoever. They might decide to move on from him. They moved on from Justin Barron pretty, and that was another risk that they took. And that was another move that, you know, pissed off their coach. He was not happy that Arturi Lehkonen got traded. Um, and they realized that they went and got the wrong guy, and they fixed it, and they made an excellent trade. A trade that I still
Yes.
don't understand from Nashville Predators' perspective, but a trade that was worked out very well for the Montreal Canadiens. What did I say their record is? 32, 16, and 8 since Alex Carrier arrived in Montreal. That is the Montreal Canadiens regular season record with Alexandre Carrier, a member of the organization. I can tell you that the Predators' record is not that. It's,
Gosh.
it's so
No,
it's
it's
not
not.
Justin Barron's fault, um, but anyhow, all that to say, to answer your question in an extremely long-winded way, which is my way of doing things. Um, no, I don't
Well,
think.
the
I
more you,
don't think
okay, the
that's
more you do TV, the shorter your interventions
yeah,
will be.
that's right.
So keep going on TV and be cut by the host. You'll learn to keep it
Right.
short.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Last night I had 4.5. Last night my thing was 4.5 minutes, and they were like, because we don't pre-record it. It's live to tape, right? So we record it
Right.
like just like a minute before it goes on the air, or 2 minutes before it goes on the air. And so it was 4.5 minutes at the end, and they're like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, sorry, but it's TV is helping me with that, but not enough apparently because I think I just talked for like 5 minutes straight to answer your question, to
It's
come
all
up with
right.
a no.
Okay,
Well,
but
do you think they would? Do you agree or disagree?
depends who's the guy on the other end.
Let's say they're getting a two. Let's say they're getting a. Let's say let's say Mason McTavish falls out of favor with the Ducks, and this contract, the Ducks are regretting signing him to this contract, and it's not really working out. And let's say they offer Mason McTavish for David Reinbacher, which I am not. I would say I would not be surprised if they already made that offer once. I don't know that for a fact, but it wouldn't shock me if it were the case.
Oh, I would do that.
You would do that? No
I
questions
would
asked.
do.
If that was like if that happened,
I would do. Well, look,
would
the,
you do
the
that at the
scenario you
deadline?
present, the scenario you present to me is if McTavish was falling out of favor, the reasons the Canadians would have to figure out while he's falling out of favor, and if it's something that bothers them or not. You
Yeah.
know, because he all of a sudden he's
But that
out of
caliber of
shape
center.
or stops caring or whatever.
Right.
You don't want that. You
But
know, there are
just theoretically, that caliber of center, more so than
yeah,
specifically Mason
yeah,
McTavish, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I would because the Canadians have the financial flexibility to keep a guy like Matheson in on their blue line and have the proper depth. They still have a lot of guys that can play D for them,
Hmm.
and it would enable them to fix their 2C situation. Yeah, of
I
course.
think that's the only scenario where they would have to consider. It would be crazy not to consider it. That would be the only scenario.
And
Is
you
if
don't.
that.
And if if drafting a guy fifth overall who's got great tools, right-handed shot, can do a bit of everything, and once he pans out, it's a promising player. But
Mhm.
if you draft him so that eventually you land a guy like that,
Yeah, and you
sure,
win.
it's not to disavow him to
Right.
trade him, you know.
Mason
So
McTavish
and
was a third overall pick, was he not?
yes, he was.
If
No,
I'm
I
not
was
mistaken.
talking. I was talking. No, if third overall, I was talking about Reinbacker.
I know you were talking about Ryan Backer, but I'm saying if
But
you trade
yes,
him for a guy that was drafted third overall, I mean, yeah,
yes, they've done that already.
yes.
Trading for a
Well, they didn't.
former third overall pick.
Well, they didn't have to give up a fifth overall, but they gave up a
No,
seventh overall, I think, right?
who what? No, 13th.
Where did 13th overall? Nazar was the 13th overall pick.
Yes.
Oh, okay, 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they
So,
drafted Korchinski seventh overall that year. I think that's what I'm thinking of.
but anyway, I think I'm not sure if McTavish is the only guy that I would do it for, but it's just at some point you have to acknowledge as an organization what are your position of strengths, what are your needs, and if you are, one good piece away from being a contender, well, choose wisely, like choose the proper grail, like in Indiana Jones.
All
But
right, you have chosen wisely.
that's it.
Yes.
Exactly. That's what you want. After the
Yes.
trade, it's like after the Carrier Baron trade, that old dude
Hmm.
looked at Kent Hughes and says, "You have chosen wisely." Yeah.
It's funny. I randomly mentioned Kevin Korchinski, but the Blackhawks are kind of in the same situation with him. Like he's back in Rockford this year.
Yeah.
Seventh overall pick, supposed to be a key piece of the rebuild. Has still not made the NHL. He was drafted in 2022.
Yeah.
Um,
Rinzel is developing faster than him.
Rinzel has passed him. I mean, he's in the lineup right now. And so yeah, it's kind of sometimes you gotta know when to cut your losses to some extent. I'm not saying that Kevin Korchinski is a loss, and I'm definitely not saying David Reinbacher is a loss. Because one side of it is sometimes you gotta know when to cut your losses. The other side of it is to know that defensemen take longer, and just because they don't make it as quickly as some other defensemen make it,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. So it's something that I think the Canadians are quite cognizant of, and you know, there's they've already invested a lot into this player to see it through, and that's why I think it would have to be a trade like that, like as
Hmm.
spectacular as that, for them to consider moving
Right.
him. Yeah,
Anyway, it's going to be a situation to follow
but
all
I think,
season long, right?
but I
So
would what I would say the added caveat to that is that their decision to trade David Reinbacher or not has nothing to do with Mike Matheson. Just because they're not going to say, "Oh, well, we have Matheson signed, let's trade him." I don't think they're ever going to do that.
it's
They
going.
would it would only be if the return is so perfect for their needs, that they have basically have no choice but to do that. But I don't think Matheson's going to enter that equation at all. Like it doesn't impact their desire to trade Reinbacher or not, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess it depends also what at what price? If you hold on to Reinback era and you see it through, which is a good expression, and I think I can see them thinking like that.
Hmm.
Um, it's because they think that ultimately he's going to be the player that they projected him to be, and but that would dislodge most likely Matheson the day that it would arrive. So
Well, it would
it
send
would.
him on to a third pairing. I mean,
That's it.
this
So
is
it
what.
depends on the price that you would, if he was to be paid as a $6.5 million third pairing guy in 3-4 years. So
Mm.
let it be like that. That's fine with the cap rising and all that. But if you commit like a very large amount of money, I don't know. We'll see. It's
Man, I was just looking at it. The pick after Korchinski was Marco Casper.
okay.
Mm, that's that's tough.
All right, buddy. Let's
Yeah.
wrap it up. Yeah, let's wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, um, for being with us again on this Friday. And we'll be back on Monday with another episode. Canadians are hosting the New York Rangers on Saturday night. Uh,
And the Buffalo
Mixed bags
Sabres
for
on
them.
Monday. So we'll figure out what we're going to do on Monday, but there will be an episode. It might be very early or it might be in between the skate and the game. We'll surprise you.
Yeah, that's it.
We'll
Yeah,
see how that goes.
you'll probably surprise me too. All right,
Bye
everybody. Bye bye. Have a good weekend.
bye.
Notebook, that's some good day.